Good morning, everyone. We are here to discuss more about ECI 7 declines in PSD2. As we all know, that from January 2021, all the merchants, issuers, acquirers, all the online transaction needs to be 3DS2 enabled. So everybody, the entire world is trying, especially in the EMEA region, we are trying that the transactions happening should meet the SCA regulations. Now, I am here to help those who are facing the ECI 7 declines while their implementation to PSD2. So let's jump into understanding what ECI decline means. Now, here we see that ECI declines are usually happening when the transaction takes place, and the very first step of the transaction is the authentication process. So once a transaction takes place, it needs to get authenticated to proceed to the next step. So at that particular step, if the authentication fails or the authentication did not happen, we get an ECI 7 decline. It's an indication for the merchant that this particular transaction was not authenticated. So would the merchant like to proceed with this unauthenticated transaction or not? Just in case merchant tries and feels safe with this ECI 7 declined unauthenticated transaction, he would be proceeding at its own risk. We will discuss this in detail in the liability section. So as of now, it is pretty clear that ECI 7 decline is happening when there is a failure in the authentication. Now we need to find out how to reduce the chances of getting an ECI 7 decline, why it happens, what's the root cause, how can we fix it, and how can we increase the success count of our transactions which a merchant is receiving. So the basic causes can be either one of them or maybe many of them. It's really tough to find out the exact cause, but we have to anyhow proceed with it and struggle a bit to make it success. So let's start with the reasons. So the very first basic reason is if the authentication itself did not take place. There can be a number of reasons why authentication did not take place. Maybe the user did not enter the authentication details, it did not reach the issuer, uh, uh, or maybe the authentication failed because the card user um, entered a wrong OTP, or he left the screen open and did not enter the OTP at all. Session timeout happened, internet issue, X, Y, Z, and number of issues for which the authentication did not take place or it failed. Now, other reasons which lead to the failure of authentication can be either the card is not 3D enabled, it is not PSD2 compliant, or the card issuer itself is not 3D enabled, or maybe the acquirer is still not 3D enabled. They have not met the guidelines and rules and regulations. They are still updating their softwares. Other than that, other reasons can be there is a config setting there, it's some code issue, some config setting is there, some which is blocking, some configuration is missing which is blocking the authentication. Sometimes the acquirer did not receive the authentication details, some network issue, some blockage, some firewall is causing a blockage because of which the acquirer does not receive the credentials which issuer should have transferred to the acquirer, and in that case acquirer has the right to downgrade that unauthenticated transaction to an ECI 7. So since it's kind of a layer by layer processing, at every layer, any of the layer breaking down can cause an ECI 7 decline. So it is in fact actually really tough to find out the root cause for ECI decline. It's a kind of a bit struggle. So we will find out how we will handle this struggle so that we can increase our success rate of the orders. Now, I'll be making a separate video to discuss that in detail, that how to handle these ECI 7s and how to get a higher success rate without much trade-off and still keeping the SCA intact and meeting all the regulations and guidelines of PSD2. The tip of the day for you is, if you are you for Mastercards do not have any ECI 7 values. So if you are still facing ECI 7 declines when it's a Mastercard, then yes, you can still get ECI 7 for Mastercards, but the reason is not the card, reason is not the card issuer, the reason is something else. So that is a kind of a bit help for you to figure out what the issue is. In case of Mastercard, you don't have to look at any issue with the card, you don't have to look at any issue with the card issuer, because they never send us the response for unauthenticated transactions as ECI 7. They send the value as 01. So it's a kind of a shorter list for Mastercards to figure out what the issue is. So that's all for today, and we will be discussing it further in detail, that when you are facing ECI 7s, what should you do, how should you handle them, how should you make sure that you receive lesser ECI 7s so that your orders doesn't get declined and you succeed in having a better success rate of your orders without affecting the business. That's all for today. Thank you very much.